Hi everyone, it's Elizabeth here. So today I'm doing this video in regards to, I guess, kind of some expression on my path toward Christianity. It's actually I find it kind of an interesting story or path that if you are on some form of path toward either Christianity or toward, having a relationship with God, I hope that my words or story or kind of a balanced approach can help you on your path and journey in life. It's been, I guess, a long journey for me to kind of, steer my life more into Christianity and start to make choices to where it's like this is the path that I'm going to, and I'll kind of explain why. So I did write a book, and I published it while I lived in Germany, which is called Finding Om, which is basically about my spiritual awakening and journeying as a young woman in college who had to overcome a lot of things, from stress to body weight image issues to issues with men and stuff like that. And I definitely went through the whole yoga and meditation in India thing. There was a lot of, I talked a lot about like my travels in Australia as well, where I started yoga. And so I look back at that now, that I written it that I did this experience 12 years ago. And there's a part of me that is like, wow, I've really grown quite much, because that is obviously just a certain segment and a point in time through my life. And part of me, I look back and I read it, and it's like I'm slightly ashamed of it. And then there's a part of me that's like, there's still a lot of truths and stuff like that to these parts of spirituality, because you have like the New Age type of stuff, which really contradicts with Christianity, or some of the old kind of pagan type of religions and stuff like that conflict with Christianity. And I will say that there is a massive, huge difference between Christian faith versus Christian religion. I've always dogged religion, especially in my young 20s. I was a huge Christian basher just because I had so much, I guess, judgment and bad experiences from people who were like, well, you're not a true Catholic because you go to public school. And I was like, screw you. Shit's expensive. It's like, whatever. I went to public school. My God, it's like my dad painted houses and my mom was a waitress. Like, for God's sake. So there were things like that judgment that really turned me off. And obviously, being younger, I never knew much. Like, I never read the Bible in its entirety, maybe like a little bit. But I found that it wasn't for me. But at that time, I didn't understand or realize the difference between religious dogma and understanding Christian faith. A lot of where my journeying began was around 29 to 30 years old, of living in Europe. Now, at that time, I was not a believer. I found the churches to be very fascinating. Sometimes I found them like a little creepy. I found them creepier more in like 2013, when I did a lot of traveling with my ex-husband in places like Italy and in Rome, because at that time I studied Reiki, so I could feel a lot of like dark energy. But as I went into living in Germany, I started to see the beauty of the church and how deep and ancient this wisdom was, but I still wasn't quite there. It actually started to happen when I started to come back from America, so in January of 2016. Now, I did live in Germany through the massive shift that it had, through the migration crisis, and there were a lot of things that happened during that time, some stuff that happened to me while in Europe by non-Germans that, I don't know, it was just like I started to look at society different. It's like, God, these Western civilized cultures don't treat women in this way. They don't approach women off the street and just grab their arm and things like that. Like, those are not acceptable behavior things. And so I started to see this shift of how Christian faith really affected Western civilization in a very positive way. Like, living in a socialist country, socialism is rooted to kind of Christian roots of take caring and loving thy neighbor, taking care of the poor, which a lot of like things like the Bible talks about. But I just kind of started to go through this like personal shift myself in early 2016, and I didn't really quite know how to handle it. So I had to work with kind of, I guess, like my counselor at the time, because I was seeing such a shift to where I've always been like a modest person, but I started seeing myself becoming like a little bit more modest and more traditional as I aged. So I didn't know if that was an age thing or if it's like society is getting so bizarre. But I think moving back to Seattle, things are just so different here as compared to living in Germany that my ex mentioned to me. He goes, this place is like Sodom and Gomorrah. And I'm like, what's that? So I started reading a lot about it, and it was a lot of, the whole Sodom and Gomorrah story is like, the city that's living in chronic sin. And I just started to see a part of Seattle that I never saw before, because being gone for about a year and a half, the whole Amazon tech culture really started to boom. But then as I started to gain more private clients, I started to hear people's stories on a personal level, which included them, dabbling with a lot of drugs. There's a lot of underground sex parties in Seattle that, these swinger sex parties that especially a lot of like wealthier tech people attend. And I was like, oh my God, maybe my ex-husband is right. And then we went to Europe. I have a blog link below that talks about this, but of my experience. But I don't know, in 2016, I just had this thing with sparrows. And then I kept reading about sparrows and how the sparrow was one of the birds that was present during the crucifixion of the crucifying of Christ. And I was in Seville, Spain. My husband at the time was in the Netherlands at a conference, and I've wanted to go to Seville, Spain ever since I was like 18 years old. I don't know why. There was just something in me. I'm like, I need to go. So I finally got to go at the age of 31. So it took me like 12 years to be able to finally make it to Seville. And I was there during Corpus Christi. This is in the blog link below my story. And I just had these moments of like Jesus experiences. I'm not going to talk about the fighting between the Protestants and the Catholics. But the thing is, the Spaniards and Southern Europeans in general are very religious, but they are also very family orientated. And I just saw how families continued to love each other, to walk with each other in the street. They were all dressed very nice, like the presentation of the Spaniards. It doesn't mean you have to be wealthy or anything like that, but their presentation was very, it was attractive, let's put it that way. And like the men and the women. And I just thought, I was like, wow, our society in America is getting so casual. It's so relaxed. I'm like, oh, we all kind of like hate our families. Like we constantly have dysfunctional family television shows. We're all kind of dysfunctional to some degree. I was like, maybe this is breeding dysfunction more than what dysfunctional families already exist. And I just stood outside of the main cathedral watching these people, bring in the Mother Mary on this cart, and I went inside the cathedral and I just like laid up against a pillar and I just started bawling my eyes out. I had this emotional meltdown in the church, and the only thing that came to mind was like Jesus Christ. And so I was really, I guess, on this path of like walking forward toward it, but they felt like there were some things I had to do. Like I went to Burning Man in 2016, and that was a fun experience, but I definitely started to see life through a different lens, like the light and the dark. In Burning Man, there is the light side and the very dark and hedonistic side. And I just realized, I was like, you know what, I think I'm just outgrowing this. Like, I don't think I need to really do rave techno parties. Like, I kind of got it out of my system, and I never did drugs or anything. I never even drank at that because I felt like the music and the lights and everything like that was euphoric enough. And I just started to realize as I started to become more domestic and having these Jesus experiences, like, I just wanted to become more simple than I already was and just kind of, live a simple, healthy life. And the thing is, I'm wearing this necklace because I saw this cross necklace at a shop in Seville, and I walked by the shop like 19 times, and I kept looking at it. And then it was finally the day that I left, and I was like, if that cross is still here, like I really wanted to buy it. And then I'm like, who wears this stuff? I'm like, you can't wear this in Seattle. People will think you're nuts. Or weird or whatever, or some, right-wing zealot just because you believe in Christ. And I walked by the shop the day that I left, and I was like, oh my God, the necklace wasn't outside. And I was like, oh God, like there was like some loss that was in me. I was like, oh God, someone else got it, like shit. And then I walked into the shop and asked them, I was like, hey, do you have that like pink stone cross necklace, the kooks? And they're like, oh yeah, it's here. And so it was like €10, and I ended up buying it. Um, and I was like, you know what, maybe this is the start. At that time, I saw a lot of repeating numbers like 214 and 314. And I, checked into my hotel room in Seville for 5 nights at like 9 o'clock at night, and I was given a key to the room 214. And so I'm like, God, maybe I am on this path. And that interest started to blossom and grow. I started to go to a yoga class at St. Mark's Cathedral in the Capitol Hill district, and I started to talk to the yoga instructor who was very Christian but also did yoga, and I'm like, how does that work? I was so confused because it always feels like you have to be in one boat or the other. You can never be both, or you can't really integrate. And so now that I've been on this path, the whole divorce thing, I just remember watching on Netflix like The Son of God, and I was just like bawling my eyes out the whole time watching this television movie show, which was the story of Christ, because I'm like, God, this guy died for all of our sins. Like, whether you believe in Jesus or not, like, even if you think he's a fake man in the sky, like, the story of him is very inspiring, because a lot of what he did also, he was like, Jesus was anti-establishment. He went in and flipped up the tables of Rome, and just got pissed about the taxing and stuff like that. So it's like the guy was anti-establishment. Rome was the biggest empire that's ever lived on this planet. And here was like one man who looked like a hippie. Jesus had a beard, long hair, a white cloak with Birkenstocks. I mean, I think Jesus was a Virgo, but this is a whole other topic in itself. He was an earthly man that channeled the love of Christ, but he also healed people. So if he was the incarnated soul of God and used God's energy to heal people from leprosy and disability and stuff like that, then that means he was a conduit of God's energy to help heal. Now, I could be interpreting this wrong, but I'm like, that's a lot of what you study in Reiki. So I was all about this like integration piece. And now as we're entering kind of this new age, we are entering a new paradigm. I'm like, well, maybe the integrativeness of Christianity and some other forms of spirituality can have its merits, because I do see a lot of Christians who are completely disconnected from their body. They might be programmed through religious dogma, but they eat like shit, they're morbidly obese, but they believe in Jesus. And then you have like the other people who, think Christians are fucking nuts. And then, but they're very like eco-conscious about the environment and what they eat, and they're into like organic foods and gardening and blah, blah, blah. So it's like, okay, maybe we need to integrate both. This is going to be a separate video topic in itself. As I've explored the modern dating world as a single human being, which has not been very long-lived type of relationships, I've just come to realize there is so much darkness that is blinding people on this planet, and it's like nobody has a moral compass, and that in itself is starting to draw me closer to God and to Christ, because it is the one form of self-protection that I can have is by, believing in God and Jesus and knowing that I will be protected. And if it's my end time, it's my end time. But like, I don't know. It's like any hole will do, whether it's for a man or a woman. Being in Seattle and having, it's like a guy wasn't really upfront with me about him being bisexual. And it was like his sexuality was so out of control that he was just like fucking men and women. And pardon my French, I don't mean to use that. But it was just, the more I saw this and the more I was like, good God. And, I don't know, one other person that I met, the extent of our friendship would last like 7 days. And it was basically like right away, he invited me over to his house. to lie naked under the air conditioning because it was like a hot 90-degree day. This was like in 2018. And I was like, no. I'm like, what the hell? Like, going to bed with somebody is just like eating candy nowadays. And so as I've seen this, I'm like, okay, this is either too liberal, too liberating, and or it is starting to root to become demonic, or to some degree that it is like this euphoric high that people are feeling, or they're thinking that they're getting enlightened. And the more I've read about like Satanism and Luciferianism, they do use a lot of the words enlightenment, and sometimes the enlightenment piece kind of triggers the ego and the intellect, and you think that you're on this path of, becoming whole or complete, but some of them are kind of becoming gods themselves, and that in itself is not healthy, nor is it kind of accurate. Like, when we start becoming our own gods, like the old aristocrats, I can't think of the king from France who they called him the sun god. He was a bloody narcissist. The guy was insane. So, like, he lost control of his mind. So, if we all start becoming like that, society is going to head and plummet into a not so good place. So, as I've seen this moral decay and, or other men just not respecting my borders and boundaries and being like, hey, I'm modest, like, I think sex is sacred, blah, 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 like, it's just clung me closer to God and to Christ. So maybe to some degree those things are planted in my life for a purpose and reason for me to build my relationship further with God and Jesus and stuff like that. But I'm just seeing life through a different lens, and this birth of this video fantasy world stuff, like, I live in a fantasy fairy tale sometimes, but it's more about like wearing pretty dresses in the fucking forest, not about, some anime creature that is like half human, half dog or something like that. So mind pollution today is a big thing, and that in itself has made me cling closer, especially with the rise of more sinful type of nature through like chronic drug use, alcoholism, trying to find yourself through physical pleasures of the flesh, whether that's through sex or getting high and things like that. It's just gotten too much. It's gotten too weird, let me put it that way. The more weird society gets, especially the whole binary non-gender thing, kind of weirds me out a little, but I don't mind the bathroom situation, but to some degree when we start putting it on birth certificates, it's like, is this where are we headed here, people? Anyways, I have some blog links below that you can read if you'd like to understand either a little bit more about my story or just about spiritual development in general. And, I would love to hear your story or your comments, kind of where your path has been. I do want to mention one last thing is throughout this time I did listen to the video of Doreen Virtue, and she got really shitted on. She definitely created a lot of products that benefited kind of that New Age community, but she also talked about how it's like you can't be both, and like the New Age community does think that her soul's been sold to religious dogma and things like that, but we have to understand there's a difference between religious faith and religious dogma, and there are a ton of energy healers out there who do believe in Jesus and Christianity and the Mother Mary and stuff like that, from a more healthy, positive way and lens. So anyways, these are some thoughts that I have. If you'd like to share your story or any thoughts or comments, feel free. I'm more than happy to listen and, read and reply and stuff like that. And I'll be doing more videos about some other things, because I do find it interesting too, like this thought of, was Adam and Eve vegetarian or vegan before sin happened, the fall of man? It's kind of an interesting thought. So I'll be doing some videos that are about this and some other stuff. And thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Have a great day, and thank you much. Bye.